Hello, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here to do a video review today of one of the newest lenses from Sigma, a 50mm f1.4 DG HSM lens from their Art series. This lens follows closely after the pattern established with the previous entry from this series, the 35mm f1.4. Now Sigma set their heights even higher with this particular lens because rather than targeting after an existing Canon or Nikon product, they set their sights even higher to the Zeiss Otis 55mm f1.4 and established that as their benchmark. So because of that, we find that this is a radically different kind of 50mm lens than anything Sigma has made before. And so first of all, before we jump into it, let me say the inclusion of this nice padded case is one of the best things that Sigma does. And I wish that other manufacturers would take notes from that, because this is actually a useful case with some protection value as opposed to what many other manufacturers offer. The Sigma 50mm f1.4 Art lens looks very similar to the 35mm from it before. It is a beautifully designed lens, and it bears almost no resemblance other than a 77mm front filter thread, but bears other than that almost no resemblance to Sigma's previous 50mm f1.4. I really like the new design ethos that Sigma is using. This is a very elegant, classy looking lens design, and it is, for me, it's a huge upgrade over Sigma's previous look. I really like the way that they use, rather than using colors to differentiate the lens and keep it from being too monochromatic, they actually use a lot of different textured surfaces, be it a matte versus a gloss finish, or the use of light ribbing along certain elements. But the result is a very modern looking, but I believe a design that is going to weather the passage of time and will stand up as a very elegant looking. This is one of the best looking lenses that I've ever seen. I like the way that they use 4 distinct bevels as the lens kind of tapers forward as it moves forward towards the front element. And that is helped. That final bevel is the one that goes out to the lens hood. And let me say, this is the nicest lens hood, bar none, that I have seen to this point. Let me just stop for a moment and comment on the fact that this is obviously not an afterthought, but it was a part of the whole design of the lens. For one thing, it has some of the light ribbing that is very complementary to the overall look of the lens itself. But then just a super nice touch is the fact that there is a slightly rubberized surface right at the place where the lens hood itself will mount onto the lens. And so that's a place where you're going to be touching when you go to remove the lens. And it was a very thoughtful touch that showed a lot of effort that went into the design here. It's a highly functional hood, and it does a great job. As far as the lens itself, there is really only one switch here on the lens, and that is for the autofocus on or off. Other than that, there is a distance window and some other markings. This lens is not weather sealed or does not claim weather sealing, and there is no rubber gasket around the lens mount. Other than that, however, there is nothing to complain about the design. It is a beautiful lens. Before we actually talk about some other things, let's talk for a moment about there's just one ring here, and that is the focus ring. It is a little bit heavier or stiffer than what I would like. I've been currently reviewing some other manual focuses lens, including a Zeiss Otis 85mm lens, and along with this 50mm f1.4 planar T lens from Zeiss. And of course, these lenses are designed from the beginning for manual focus, and so their action is just that much smoother than what the Sigma's is. One other issue that you will run into if you do need to manual focus with the Sigma lens is the fact that because it's not designed specifically to be a manual focus lens, there's very little travel or play between, say, around 10 feet to infinity, which means if you do need to isolate focus, and of course with a wide aperture f1.4 lens, there is a lot of critical focus in that area from 10 feet out to infinity, but there is very little play there, very little travel, and so your whole revolution is only that far. And so that means that it becomes difficult to achieve critical focus if you need to manually focus in that area. Now, Before we talk about the actual optics, let's talk about the fact that this is, other than the Zeiss Otis 55mm f1.4, which is a larger still, this is otherwise the largest 50mm lens that has been produced. It's a very different design. I've thought of primes often in the past as something you can throw in a pocket. Well, you better get bigger pockets if that's your plan with this lens. It's not a small lens. In fact, you will find that it is both longer and heavier than Sigma's own 24 to 70mm f2.8 zoom lens. And so it's not a small lens at all, and as you can see, when you compare it to the 50mm f1.4 Zeiss, this is not the Otis but the older planar T, you'll see that they are very, very different in size. And this Zeiss lens is more similar to what, say, Canon's 50mm f1.4 lens as well. And so you're talking about a much larger lens to deal with. Also heavier, although when you're used to using full frame lenses, you should not be overly concerned about the weight of this particular lens. It's also not inexpensive. The current list price at B&H Photo is $949. And that's compared to the Canon 50mm f1.4 at $349, and approximately the same price for Sigma's earlier 50mm f1.4 lens. That being said, this lens optically is in a class completely different than those lenses, and really is not hardly a comparable tool. A more fair comparison point would be towards Canon's 50mm f1.2, although that has a much larger aperture. Its price point is more like $1,500 plus, and of course Sigma's own sights were set on the Zeiss Otis 55mm f1.4, which retails for around $4,000. And so when you put it in that light, the price becomes, of course, much more reasonable. And truth be told, for the optical performance that this lens has, the price point is entirely reasonable. And the optics are exceptional on this lens. Other than the Otis, it is the sharpest, most contrasty 50mm lens that you're going to find out there. It is sharp from wide open. It is completely usable at f1.4. I've heard some reviewers say in writing that the optics are really comparable to Sigma's previous 50mm lens. I have no idea where that assessment comes from, because I used and reviewed Sigma's previous 50mm lens, and frankly I hated it. It was very dreamy, wide open, and didn't seem to improve as quickly as what I would like, and it was loaded with green fringing, to me, which really diminished the image quality. This lens stands head and shoulders above it. It is sharp, wide open. There's none of that dreamy or soft feel to it, but it is very sharp, wide open. It has very low chromatic aberrations. You will find that there is some bokeh chromatic aberrations, but they only show up in very unique situations. But in terms of field chromatic aberrations, they are extremely well controlled on this. It has great contrast, great micro contrast, and which helps its look at wide open apertures. It also has very low distortion, which means that if you're shooting something that has straight lines, you don't really have to worry about a whole lot of correction in post. It is very good. And so optically, this lens is really exceptional. As far as the bokeh quality, bokeh is a subjective subject. But I find that the bokeh quality is good. There's really nothing bad about it. It doesn't have quite the artistic feel as, say, this Zeiss 50mm planar T. I find that what you might call the drawing from either this lens or Canon's own 50mm f1.2, I would say that their bokeh rendition is slightly more artful than what this is. But there is nothing really negative about the Sigmas. The only thing that I observed, and it was only in a couple of very isolated situations, is just a hint of that nervous quality that 50mm lenses often will have in bokeh in the transition zone. And that was only with an isolated incident. But I did note that, where I feel that, for example, this lens handles that a little bit better. The autofocus, for the most part, is good. It's quick, it's quiet. However, it is not always consistent. There would be some settings where I would shoot a series and the autofocus accuracy would be very good. There would be other settings, however, where there would be some that would be missed, and not just missed by a little bit, but missed quite badly, even though the lens signified that focus lock had been achieved. Kind of anecdotal evidence, but others have reported very similar findings, that their AF performance is inconsistent, and often it will be consistent for a period of time and then inconsistent in others. Now, Sigma has tried to address this by releasing a USB dock that allows you to do somewhat of a fine-tuning of the lens to your specific body. That does introduce a bit of a complexity to ownership that not every user is going to be comfortable with. And so for those of you that are more technical, this will be something you'll probably find an asset to getting the best out of your lens. But for those of you who are not and really just want to be able to put a lens on your camera body and start shooting, you might find that AF performance, it could be anywhere on the map. It could be good, but there are others who have had very inconsistent performance. It'll work fine at times, and then for some unknown reason, it will not behave as consistently at other times. And that has been my experience as well. However, I do want to add to that for the most part, I have had pretty good AF consistency from this particular lens. As I come to conclusion here, I can't help but wish, because of the size and weight of this lens, that there was something that was out like my EF 35mm f2 IS. The size of this lens is really what I would prefer to see for a 50mm prime lens. I mean, unless it's a long telephoto, I prefer my prime lenses to be smaller. That's typically one of the advantages to a prime, is that there's less weight and size, and you can pack a few of them along without worrying a lot about size constraints. This lens is in a completely different category, and so that is one issue. I should also say that I still find that the AF consistency and AF performance of this lens is still quite a bit ahead of the Sigma. This 35mm f2 IS is really one of the most consistently focusing lenses that I have ever used. This has been kind of one of Sigma's primary issues. Great optics often in their lenses, but AF consistency has been a bit of an Achilles heel for them, and I really would like to see Sigma able to address that. That being said, this is one fantastic lens. Other than those shortcomings that I've listed, this really is one of the best. Well, other than the Zeiss Otis, this is the best performing autofocus, and of course the Zeiss does not have autofocus. So if you want autofocus, this is the best 50mm option that exists right now, and at a reasonable price point. And I think that you will find that it is a very impressive lens and well worth your consideration. If you would like to read a fuller written review with many more image samples, you can click on the linkage below and take a look there and find even some full-size image samples for you to download and to take a look at. If you haven't already, please subscribe. Have a great day.